In the blistering summer of 1943, a train rolled slowly across the Texas plains, its steel wheels clattering under the weight of human defeat. Inside the sealed boxcars sat hundreds of German soldiers, men who had once fought beneath the burning skies of North Africa. They were tanned, dusty, and silent, their uniforms faded by desert winds and stained by surrender. Most of them had served in Erwin Rommel's once mighty Afrika Korps, the pride of Hitler's Wehrmacht, now reduced to weary prisoners bound for an unknown land. As the train curved through endless fields of cotton and grain, the men stared through the slits in the wood, expecting to see a ruined, war-torn America, a land struggling under rationing, blackout curtains, and bomb scars like Europe. Instead, what they saw stunned them into silence. Stretching to the horizon were vast farmlands, golden and untouched by war. Tractors plowed through the earth. Children played by the roadsides. And everywhere there were cars, new cars, shining under the Texas sun. Oberleutnant Carl Fischer, a 27-year-old tank officer captured near Tunis, whispered under his breath, "If this is a defeated country, then what have we been fighting for?" No one answered. The train slowed as it neared Camp Hearn, one of the largest German POW camps in the United States. Wooden barracks stood neatly in rows, surrounded not by ruins, but by green lawns and white fences. The guards, many of them older American soldiers or farm boys in khaki, looked relaxed. They carried rifles, but their faces were calm, not angry, not cruel, just confident. When the boxcar doors finally slid open, the desert veterans stepped into blinding sunlight. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and corn. Behind them, the stars and stripes fluttered lazily in the wind. Ahead stood rows of American military trucks, gleaming, well-maintained, brand new. Fisher blinked in disbelief. Even in wartime, America's machinery looked infinite. As the prisoners lined up for processing, one of them, a mechanic from Hamburg named Otto Lehmann, muttered to his comrade, "This can't be right. They told us the Americans were weak, that their factories were few, that their people were soft." His friend shrugged. Maybe it's just for show. But over the next weeks and months, that illusion shattered. Inside the camp, the prisoners were given clean clothes, regular meals, and even cigarettes. There's order, discipline, but also dignity. Many of them were shocked to be treated not as beasts, but as soldiers who had simply lost. And when work details began, cutting wood, tending farms, and, for the skilled ones, visiting local facilities to assist with maintenance, they began to see something far more astonishing. Fisher and a handful of others were assigned to assist at a nearby machine plant, part of a sprawling industrial complex producing aircraft components. On that day, when the camp truck rolled up to the factory gates, Fisher's world cracked open. Before him stood a building the size of a small city, with a parking lot filled with hundreds of cars. Inside, thousands of workers, men and women, moved in a seamless rhythm, assembling engines and airframes under bright electric lights. Conveyor belts stretched for hundreds of meters. The air roared with the hum of industry. A foreman shouted an order. Somewhere, a crane lifted a bomber fuselage with effortless precision. Fisher just stared, speechless. In Africa, he had watched the Luftwaffe struggle to keep a handful of aircraft flying. Here, in a single American factory, they were building more planes in a week than Germany could repair in a month. That evening, back in camp, as the desert veterans gathered by the barrack windows, Fisher said quietly, "Now I understand why we lost in Tunisia and why we'll lose the war." Outside, beyond the barbed wire, a train whistle echoed through the warm Texas night, hauling yet another shipment of American-made aircraft engines eastward, toward the coasts, toward the skies over Europe. By the spring of 1943, the North African campaign had become a graveyard for Hitler's ambitions. For nearly 3 years, German and Italian forces under the command of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had fought a brilliant, desperate struggle against the British Eighth Army and, later, the newly arrived American forces. The fighting had stretched from the Libyan deserts to the Tunisian hills, across endless dunes and scorching plains, where supply lines mattered more than courage, and where oil was worth more than blood. Rommel's Afrika Korps had once been feared for its speed, precision, and near-mythical reputation. Their panzers had swept across North Africa like a sandstorm, capturing thousands and outmaneuvering the Allies again and again. German propaganda had called them invincible. But by early 1943, the tide had turned. The Allies, now unified under General Dwight D. Eisenhower, had learned fast. American manufacturing was feeding British logistics. Convoys poured weapons, fuel, and spare parts into Africa faster than the Axis could destroy them. The Luftwaffe, once supreme in the skies, was bleeding aircraft faster than Berlin could replace them. The desert that had once favored mobility now became a trap for those without supplies. By May 1943, it was over. Surrounded near Tunis, more than 250,000 Axis soldiers, German and Italian, surrendered to the Allies. It was one of the largest mass capitulations of the war, rivaled only by Stalingrad. Among the captured were many of Rommel's most hardened veterans, engineers, artillerymen, and officers who had fought through the harshest conditions imaginable. But as the desert battles ended, a new question emerged. What to do with so many prisoners? The British already had thousands of POWs in North Africa, straining local resources. Europe was still an active war zone, too dangerous and too politically complex to house so many Germans. And the U.S., with its vast land, security, and industrial capacity, became the logical answer. So, beginning in mid-1943, a quiet but massive logistical operation unfolded. Operation Bolero's Silent Cargo. Ship after ship departed from Oran, Casablanca, and Algiers, carrying not just supplies, but prisoners. Packed aboard converted troop transports, tens of thousands of German and Italian POWs began the long voyage across the Atlantic. The journey was tense. Many feared U-boat attacks, ironic given they once cheered for them. Others wondered what awaited them in America. Nazi propaganda had painted the United States as a chaotic, racially divided, morally bankrupt land, ruled by money, not strength. To these soldiers, being shipped there felt like an exile to another planet. When they finally arrived at ports like Norfolk, Boston, and New York, they were stunned. Even the docks were unlike anything they had seen. Mountains of supplies, crates of food, machinery, fuel drums, and ammunition stretched into the distance. Trucks moved in orderly lines. Cranes worked day and night. The Americans didn't seem to be at war. They seemed to be thriving because of it. From these ports, the prisoners were sent by train to hundreds of camps spread across the U.S. heartland. There were camps in Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Kansas, Wisconsin, and dozens more. In total, more than 425,000 German POWs would spend time in America between 1943 and 1946, more than the population of some small European nations. Camp Hearne, Texas, where Carl Fisher and his comrades were sent, was among the first and largest. Built to house around 4,800 men, it soon became a model of order and efficiency. It had barracks, a hospital, workshops, a canteen, and even a theater. Inside, the Germans tried to recreate their own small world, complete with discipline, routines, and even internal factions between die-hard Nazis and those disillusioned by Hitler. But what struck the prisoners most wasn't the camp itself. It was what lay beyond its fences. Every week, American trucks arrived delivering supplies, fresh food, clean uniforms, newspapers. Not just for the guards, but for the prisoners too. Even at war, even feeding millions of troops overseas, the U.S. could afford to feed its enemies well. Many POWs gained weight for the first time since before the war. Letters from home painted a grim picture: bombings, rationing, hunger. Meanwhile, here in Texas, there were no air raids, no shortages. Coca-Cola was plentiful. Cigarettes came by the carton. And every day, more trains thundered past the camp, loaded with tanks, trucks, and crates marked Boeing, Douglas, Lockheed, and North American Aviation. To men like Fisher and Lehman, the contradiction was staggering. How could a nation so untouched by war produce so much for it? The truth lay in something far deeper than they could see from behind the wire. By 1943, the United States had achieved something the world had never witnessed before: a total industrial mobilization. Factories that once built cars now built tanks. Typewriter companies made machine guns. Refrigerator plants made aircraft engines. Shipyards launched a new vessel every few hours. And the entire system was powered by a civilian workforce. Millions of men and women united under the belief that their effort could end tyranny. At its peak, America was producing 96,000 aircraft per year, 57,000 tanks, and 2.6 million machine guns. Entire cities pulsed with the rhythm of production: Detroit, Seattle, Los Angeles, and Chicago beating like the industrial heart of freedom itself. In contrast, Germany's factories were being pulverized from the air. The Reich's cities burned nightly under Allied bombing raids. The once mighty Luftwaffe could no longer protect the homeland. Fuel shortages crippled the Wehrmacht, and what production remained was strained by bureaucracy, political infighting, and a labor force increasingly composed of enslaved foreign workers and concentration camp prisoners. None of this was visible to the German soldiers in Texas yet, but the signs were everywhere. When they were taken on work details to nearby farms or factories, the truth emerged piece by piece. The roads were paved and endless. The farms used machines, not horses. Even the smallest workshop seemed better supplied than a frontline repair unit back in Afrika. One prisoner, a Luftwaffe mechanic named Ernst Kappel, later wrote in his diary, "We believed America was soft, but we see now they fight with machines, not with pride. And machines never tire." For many, it was the first crack in years of propaganda. The war, they began to realize, had never been equal. Germany had fought with courage, but America fought with abundance. By autumn 1943, when work details expanded, Camp Hearn's officers started assigning small groups of skilled prisoners to assist at local industries, sawmills, agricultural plants, and in rare cases, defense subcontractors under guard. Fisher's group, chosen for their engineering backgrounds, was among these. Their destination: a small aircraft component plant affiliated with the Dallas-based North American Aviation Company, builders of the legendary P-51 Mustang. For men who had watched Stukas and Messerschmitts dominate the skies, it was an unthinkable irony to now walk among their enemies' machines. Yet what they saw there would haunt them long after the war ended. The morning the truck carried Fisher's work detail out of Camp Hearn, the Texas sky was a hard, endless blue. The men sat silently in the back, the flatbed bouncing over dirt roads lined with mesquite and cotton fields. The driver, a young corporal from Oklahoma, chewed gum and whistled a tune from the radio. For the Germans, it was another reminder of how strange this land felt. A place where war seemed impossibly distant, where the air smelled of oil and sunshine rather than fear. The truck turned off the main road toward a cluster of large buildings. Fences of chain link and steel surrounded them. Beyond, they saw rows of glass windows glinting like mirrors, and the faint roar of engines echoed in the distance. As the gate opened, Fisher's first thought was that they had arrived at some kind of airfield. Then he saw the sign, painted in bold red letters: Consolidated Aircraft, Fort Worth Division. The prisoners were ushered off the truck, watched by armed guards who seemed bored rather than threatening. Inside the plant, the heat gave way to a thunderous hum, the sound of machines in constant motion. Conveyor belts snaked across the floor, carrying sheet aluminum to drilling stations. Sparks flared where welders joined the skeletons of aircraft wings. Overhead, giant cranes glided silently, moving fuselages from one line to the next. Fisher froze in place. He had seen aircraft assembly in Tunisia, crude workshops trying to keep a few battered Messerschmitts flying with scavenge parts. But this was something else entirely. The space stretched for hundreds of meters, and everywhere men and women worked side by side. Women with rolled sleeves and hair tied in scarves, their faces streaked with sweat and determination. They moved with precision, following printed charts, gauges, and schedules posted on the walls. No shouting, no chaos, only rhythm. An industrial orchestra. A foreman led the Germans to a side area where older mechanics were assembling hydraulic components. "These fellas are good with machinery," the guard explained. "Put him to work cleaning and sorting the tooling." The foreman, a thick-armed Texan with a cigarette hanging from his lip, nodded. "Just don't break anything, boys." Fisher bent over a workbench and picked up a piece of aluminum, light, flawless, polished. The tag read, P-51B Elevator Assembly. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the craftsmanship. Germany's engineers prided themselves on perfection, but they had never produced in such volume. He looked up and saw racks upon racks of identical parts waiting for installation. Thousands of them. Next to him, Otto Lehman whispered, "It's like an army of machines." Fisher nodded. "And everyone fights better than we ever could." As the hours passed, they watched the process unfold, stamping, riveting, testing. Each section moved on to the next, precise as clockwork. American supervisors moved among the workers with clipboards, checking data. The Germans were astonished at the openness. No secrecy, no SS officers watching, no fear. Information flowed freely because efficiency, not ideology, ruled here. During the lunch break, Fisher saw the cafeteria, bright, clean, efficient. The workers laughed, shared sandwiches, passed around newspapers filled with sports scores and movie ads. War news was there too, but it seemed distant, factual. The optimism was startling. In Germany, people whispered of bombings and shortages. Here, they planned next weekend's baseball game. That night, back at the camp, Fisher couldn't sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling fan, turning lazily above him. Around him, snores filled the barack. In his mind replayed the endless rows of aircraft wings, the confident rhythm of the assembly line. He realized with a chill that this, not Rommel's tactics or Hitler's speeches, was what would decide the war. Machines, fuel, steel, logistics. America had all of it. Over the following weeks, their work detail continued. The prisoners became a quiet part of the factory's background. Some helped clean equipment. Others sorted fasteners or swept shavings. They watched as new aircraft rolled out almost daily. Sometimes the foreman would point out details. "That's a Mustang," he said once, tapping the nose of a finished plane. "They're going to fly these across the Atlantic. Escort our bombers all the way to Berlin." Berlin. The word hit Fisher like a blow. He imagined the city where he had once studied engineering, the narrow streets, the smell of coal smoke, the tram bells. Could these shining machines one day thunder over it, raining destruction the way German bombers had done to London? He wanted to dismiss the thought, but the evidence surrounded him. America could build thousands of these. Germany could barely build hundreds. The moral shock. Not every prisoner accepted what they saw. Some, especially the staunch Nazis, insisted it was all propaganda, that the Americans were showing them only one factory, hiding the rest of their weakness. A man named Voigt, a former party official, declared, "The Führer has secret weapons. The Reich will answer soon enough." Others nodded, more out of fear than conviction. But most, like Fisher, could no longer believe. Each week brought new work sites, grain silos brimming with wheat, rail lines stretching beyond the horizon, power plants humming with energy. Everything functioned, smoothly, endlessly, relentlessly. America's strength was not in any secret weapon. It was in this system, this vast web of production and willpower. Even simple details shattered old illusions. When they visited a small-town hardware store under guard, the shelves overflowed, tools, radios, clocks. Fisher remembered Berlin shops with empty counters, ration cards, and blackout curtains. Here, civilians bought luxuries during wartime. If this was a nation struggling, then what did victory look like? Sometimes local farmers spoke with them. One old man laughed when asked if he feared shortages. "Son, we got more wheat than we can eat. Government just pays us not to grow too much." The Germans exchanged stunned looks. Their homeland was starving, and this man was paid not to farm. It was beyond comprehension. The turning point. In December 1943, Fisher's group was reassigned to the nearby airfield to assist in ground maintenance. It was there that he witnessed the true scale of American air power. Every day, squadrons of new aircraft arrived, their polished wings gleaming in the winter sun. Crews worked around the clock testing engines, adjusting propellers, and preparing for shipment overseas. One morning, as he helped move crates of spare parts, Fisher saw a row of B-24 Liberators taxiing for takeoff. Their engines thundered like distant storms. The ground shook. One after another, they lifted into the sky, heavy and powerful. A sergeant nearby grinned. "That's just the morning batch. Another's going out after lunch." Fisher counted 12 planes, then another 12. In Germany, each bomber was a national investment, a precious resource guarded jealously. Here, they were as common as automobiles. He turned to Lehman. "If they can do this every day," he murmured, "then we have already lost." Lehman didn't answer. He just watched the planes disappear into the horizon. Letters from home. By 1944, mail began to reach the camp more regularly. Letters from Germany spoke of bombings in Hamburg, Dresden, and Berlin. Families wrote of nights spent in shelters, of ration lines, of fear. The contrast was unbearable. Here, life was calm and ordered. There, it was chaos. One evening, Fisher received a letter from his younger brother, still fighting on the Eastern Front. The handwriting was hurried. "We are surrounded by Russians. No fuel, no reinforcements. They say help is coming, but none of us believe it anymore. Keep faith in the fatherland." Fisher folded the letter and sat for a long time in silence. Around him, the camp loudspeaker played a swing tune from a local radio station. The laughter of guards drifted through the air. He thought of the endless production lines he had seen, the optimism of the American workers, and felt a deep, cold certainty. There would be no help for his brother. No secret weapon could save them. Encounters. By mid-1944, relations between guards and prisoners had softened. Some Americans brought newspapers or candy. Some POWs taught them German phrases. A few even exchanged letters after the war. Mutual respect grew, based not on ideology, but on shared professionalism, soldiers recognizing soldiers. One afternoon, a guard named Corporal Reed sat beside Fisher during lunch. "You fought in Africa, right?" he asked. "Yes," Fisher replied. Reed nodded. "Heard Rommel was a hell of a general." "He was," Fisher said quietly, "but generals don't build planes." Reed laughed. "No, sir. That's what we got Rosie the Riveter for." It was a joke, but it cut deep. Fisher had seen those Rosies, women driving the drills, riveting wings. Germany would never have allowed it. Here, women were building the machines that were breaking the Reich's back. The entire nation fought together. That realization, more than anything, convinced him the war was over long before the last battle. A visit to the heart of power. In early 1945, as the war neared its end, selected POWs were transported under guard for temporary labor assignments to larger facilities. Fisher's group was taken north toward Detroit. The moment they entered the city, they were struck speechless. Factories as far as the eye could see, Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, each the size of a German town. Roads clogged with trucks, smokestacks painting the sky. They were allowed inside the Willow Run plant, the largest aircraft assembly line in the world. One bomber every hour. A factory city under one roof. Conveyor belts half a mile long. Fisher stood on a catwalk and looked down upon the sea of movement. Thousands of workers, engines roaring, lights blazing. It was more than industry. It was civilization itself in motion. He whispered to Lehman, "How could anyone think they could defeat this?" Lehman shook his head slowly. "We were never fighting soldiers. We were fighting a continent." That night, when they returned to camp, even Voigt, the staunch Nazi, said nothing. The end approaches. As 1945 unfolded, news filtered through of Hitler's defeat, of Berlin in ruins, of Germany's surrender. The camp remained quiet. Some men wept openly, others stared into the distance. For Fisher, there was no surprise. only a dull confirmation of what he had seen 2 years earlier in that Texas factory. When American officers gathered the prisoners to announce the end of the war, the sun was setting behind the barracks. The flag on the pole caught the evening wind. The officer read the proclamation simply. Germany has surrendered unconditionally. A long silence followed. Then Fisher raised his head and said softly, "We saw it coming the day we saw your factories." When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, millions of German soldiers laid down their arms. But among them was a special group, men who had already seen the future before the war had even ended. They had seen it not in battle, but behind barbed wire under the hot Texas sun in the rhythmic pulse of American industry. For the German POWs who had spent months, some even years, in camps across the United States, the end of the war came not as a shock, but as confirmation. They had watched the truth unfold with their own eyes. The war had been lost not on the fields of Normandy or in the ruins of Berlin, but in the assembly lines of Detroit, Dallas, and Seattle. It was there, amid the noise of machines and the quiet confidence of free men and women working together, that the Germans first understood the fundamental difference between the two systems that had clashed across the world. The contrast of worlds. Inside Germany, the Nazi regime had built a war machine driven by fear, ideology, and control. Engineers worked in secret, laborers were enslaved, and resources were hoarded. Every invention, every weapon, carried the shadow of brutality, built with sweat and blood from occupied nations. America, by contrast, fought its war with openness and cooperation. Its workers were not forced but inspired. They were volunteers of industry, driven by a sense of purpose rather than coercion. When factories converted from automobiles to aircraft, from refrigerators to machine guns, the people followed willingly, believing that their work would defend freedom itself. This difference wasn't just moral, it was mechanical. America's system could adapt, innovate, and expand because it trusted its own citizens. Germany's system suffocated under its own weight. Fisher and his comrades had felt that contrast deeply. They came from a nation where questioning orders meant punishment. Here, they saw workers argue with supervisors and win because efficiency mattered more than hierarchy. And in that freedom, they saw the engine of victory, the human realization. Many POWs carried diaries or letters during their captivity. Some wrote secretly, hiding their notebooks in false walls or beneath floorboards. After the war, historians discovered hundreds of these writings. Again and again, a single theme appeared: admiration mingled with disbelief. One soldier wrote, "The Americans fight war as if it were a science, not an art. They plan, calculate, and execute with precision, and then improve the process the next day. We fight with passion. They fight with procedure. And procedure wins." Another noted, "Their workers smile. Ours curse. Their soldiers eat well. Ours starve. Their leaders think in years ahead. Ours think in days." For many of these men, captivity in America became the first time they encountered true democracy, not as propaganda, but as daily life. The guards were firm but respectful. The food was fair. Newspapers circulated freely. Even debates were allowed. Within the fences, some camps even hosted classes where POWs studied English, history, or engineering under American instructors. The effect was profound. By war's end, the U.S. military's psychological reports noted that a large percentage of German POWs had become reoriented toward democratic values. They had not been brainwashed. They had simply seen the evidence that freedom worked. Seeds of a new Germany. When repatriation began in 1946, the first ships carrying German POWs home crossed the Atlantic again, this time eastward. But the men returning were not the same as those who had left Africa 3 years earlier. Many had learned English. Many had studied. Some had worked alongside American engineers and farmers. They returned to a shattered nation with a new understanding that rebuilding required not pride, but partnership, not fear, but freedom. Carl Fischer, once a loyal officer of the Afrika Korps, returned to his hometown near Munich in late 1946. He found ruins where streets once stood, hunger where laughter once echoed. But he also found others like himself, former POWs who had seen America's strength up close. They spoke of efficiency, teamwork, industry, and democracy. Together, they became part of a quiet transformation. Many of the engineers, technicians, and craftsmen who had been prisoners went on to help rebuild Germany's infrastructure. They applied what they had learned in captivity, not militarily, but industrially. They understood assembly line systems, quality control, logistics, and organization. This experience fed directly into what later became known as the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle of post-war West Germany. Under the Marshall Plan, American aid rebuilt factories, and former POWs helped manage them. Their memories of American production methods became templates for the new German economy. It was one of the great ironies of history that the men who had once fought to destroy the United States were now rebuilding their own country in its image. A psychological victory. To historians, the German POW experience in America represents more than a military footnote. It is a psychological study in the collapse of belief. When those men first boarded the trains in Texas, they were still soldiers of the Reich. By the time they left, they were witnesses to its impossibility. The moment they saw a single factory producing more aircraft in a month than Germany could in a year, the myth of superiority died. They understood that the war they had been told was righteous and destined for victory had been doomed from start. But along with defeat came revelation. They saw that prosperity did not require tyranny, that strength did not require brutality. They learned that a nation could be both powerful and humane. For many, that realization became a quiet form of redemption. The American view. On the American side, the experience also left an impression. Guards, farmers, and factory foremen who had worked with German POWs often spoke later of their respect for the men's discipline and skill. Despite being enemies, they recognized a shared professionalism. Some communities even mourned when the POWs left. Friendships had formed, cautious, forbidden, but real. In towns across Texas, Louisiana, and the Midwest, locals remembered the polite, efficient German prisoners who repaired fences, built barns, or played music on Sundays. To many Americans, it was proof that even in war, humanity could survive. From camps to classrooms. In later years, the U.S. government declassified reports detailing the educational programs inside POW camps. American officers had realized early on that many German soldiers were technically skilled but ideologically trapped. Instead of punishment, they offered education. In Camp Hearn and others, courses were offered in mathematics, economics, and civics. Some POWs even studied the U.S. Constitution, amazed that ordinary citizens could limit their government's power by law. These lessons took root. When the prisoners returned home, they carried not just technical knowledge, but a civic blueprint. They became some of the first advocates for West Germany's new democratic identity. A quiet legacy. Decades later, historians trace the lives of former POWs. Many have become engineers, teachers, and civic leaders. A few even returned to visit America, standing once again at the places where their old world had ended and a new one had begun. One such man was Otto Lehmann. In 1972, he returned to Texas to attend a reunion organized by locals who had once guarded the camp. Standing near the site where the barracks had stood, he told a journalist, "I came here as a soldier of a lost cause. I left here as a student of the future. The day I saw that factory, I knew Germany had to change or die." His words summarized what thousands had felt. The war had been more than a battle for territory. It had been a test between two ways of life, one built on fear, the other on freedom. And freedom had won. Industrial power as the decisive weapon. The German POWs awakening mirrored a larger truth about World War II. Military historians now agree that the decisive weapon of the conflict was not a tank or a plane, but industrial capacity. While Germany built marvels of engineering, the Tiger tank, the V-2 rocket, the jet fighter, it could never build enough of them. America, by contrast, built for scale. The U.S. could lose thousands of planes and replace them in weeks. The Reich could not. In the end, every bomb that fell on Germany, every ship that sailed for Europe, every jeep, ration, and bullet, all of it flowed from the same unstoppable engine of production that Fisher and his comrades had seen firsthand. It was an army of machines, and its general was industry itself. Moral rebuilding. After the war, the psychological effect of captivity in America echoed through Germany's cultural renewal. The post-war generation rejected militarism. They embraced innovation, cooperation, and peace, not out of weakness, but understanding. They had seen what strength truly looked like. It wasn't in conquest. It was in creation. The POWs who had once believed in destiny now believed in design, in education, in rebuilding. And slowly, Germany became not the destroyer of Europe, but its builder. That transformation began not in the ashes of Berlin, but in the quiet reflection of men who once stared through barbed wire at American factories and realized they were witnessing the future. The years passed. The guns grew silent. And somewhere in the heart of Bavaria, a middle-aged man named Karl Fischer stood in front of a small machine workshop, his own. The walls were clean. The tools were sharp. A row of apprentices, young, hopeful, unscarred by war, worked quietly under his instruction. Outside, the sounds of a rebuilding Germany echoed. Trains rolling again, factories humming, streets alive with commerce and laughter. To anyone passing by, it was an ordinary workshop. But to Fischer, it was sacred ground, a symbol of redemption. He often thought back to that day in 1944, standing behind the wire fence in Texas, staring at the endless assembly lines, the roaring forges, and the hands that never stopped building. That vision had burned itself into his mind. It was the moment he had realized what true strength looked like, not in the destruction of enemies, but in the creation of possibility. The lesson that outlived the war. For the rest of his life, Fischer carried that lesson. He would tell his apprentices, machines are not for killing. They're for building life. He taught them discipline but never fear, efficiency but never cruelty. He believed that every bolt tightened, every blade sharpened, was a small act of peace, a promise that the madness of the past would never return. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he would take from his shelf a small, faded photograph, one taken secretly at the American plant during his captivity. It showed only smokestacks and cranes, but to him, it was more than metal. It was a revelation, because those factories, those endless miles of steel and sweat, had shown him that victory wasn't just won with bombs. It was built with belief in freedom, in ingenuity, in unity. The unseen victory. Across Germany, thousands of other former POWs lived with the same realization. They didn't speak of it often. They didn't boast. But their quiet influence shaped the conscience of a nation. They helped found schools, design bridges, rebuild industries, and teach the next generation that patriotism was not obedience. It was contribution. They had once fought under a flag that promised 1,000 years of domination. Now they worked under one that stood for 1,000 years of peace. It was the greatest irony of their lives, that they had to lose the war to win back their humanity. The return to Camp Hearn. In 1963, Karl Fischer returned to Texas for the first time since the war. The camp was gone, overgrown with grass and wildflowers. Only a few concrete foundations remained, the ghosts of the past. He walked the empty field where the watchtowers once stood and looked toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond those trees had been the train tracks, and beyond that, the factories that had changed everything. He stood there for a long while, eyes closed, listening. He imagined the sound again, the clang of hammers, the hiss of steam, the thundering rhythm of production. And then, quietly, he smiled. "We thought we were the masters of war," he whispered, "but they were the masters of creation." The factory lights. That night, as he drove back through the Texas plains, Fischer saw the glow of distant factory lights shimmering in the dark. To him, they no longer symbolized power or dominance, but endurance. They were the lights of a nation that had once built the weapons to end tyranny, and later built the tools to rebuild the world. As he looked out at the horizon, he thought of all the men who had stood beside him behind the wire. Men who had also seen those lights and understood, in that moment, that the future belonged not to those who destroyed, but to those who built. And so, as the night deepened and the lights flickered like stars upon the earth, Carl Fisher whispered the final truth that history had taught him. They didn't just win the war. They built the peace.